Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Trulia. I thank you for your patience for dealing with the tech issues we're having on StreamYard's end. Today we'll be covering the Melkite Schism. We're just going to start right from the beginning. Why is this important? The reason it's important is because a lot of people that are considering East versus West, Rome versus Eastern Orthodoxy, are going to think, well, maybe there's a third way. Could I be Orthodox and be union with the Pope? And that's why so many Roman Catholic apologists are Uniates. It seems like this third option. And out of all the Uniate groups, the Melkites are considered most authentically Orthodox. And the reason for this is they were in the Orthodox Church most recently compared to the other Uniate groups. And so what we're going to discuss is how the Melkite option, if one is looking for canonical authenticity and for a legitimate lineage, is not going to be a viable option for people who are looking to find the ancient one holy Catholic Apostolic Church with uninterrupted apostolic succession and canonical order. So that being said, what is our summary today? This is not to hurt feelings, but just to get right to the point. The formation of the Melkite Uniate movement in the Middle East was schismatic. The election of the first bishop was a blatant violation of their own synod's canons, that is, Antioch's canons. And the schism followed the model of previous schisms, establishing a parallel hierarchy. And so we could see that the Melkite synod within the Roman Catholic Church was like the Novatians, the Donatists, and all the others that violated canonical order and established a parallel hierarchy like any other schismatic body. And for this reason, the Melkites are not the continuation of the historical Antiochian synod, but schismatics. All sides on this, the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic side, were guilty of unchristian behavior. Schism is the fruit of the sin that exists in this era. We're going to see the dark side of orthodoxy during this era as well. And so the idea is not to point fingers. It's a warning what happens when there's sin and when we don't take our faith and make that our top priority. Now, before we get started, I just want to remind people that your support to the show makes it possible. And you support the show not by sending me money, but by supporting the missionary work in Cambodia. The links are below: PayPal, Venmo, and Patreon. Please become a monthly supporter or support monthly at PayPal or Venmo. And if you want more information, it's at orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. We're doing capital improvements at the churches. We are translating for the first time the Lives of the Saints. We hope to also publish those into a physical volume. And so your support helps this ongoing missionary work in Cambodia. So again, links are below. Now let's get started. The canonical precedent is something that's important to look at because it helps us understand what are the actual ground rules that a church ought to follow when it comes to ecclesiology. And so we're going to look at these. They're not too esoteric, but it's important because it helps us understand everything in the history that comes henceforth. So a very important canon is the first canon of the First Council of Nicaea. And it says this about the election of bishops: it is by all means proper that a bishop should be appointed by all the bishops in the province. So the canon is clear that bishops are elected with unanimous synodical consent other than emergencies. The canon, if we keep going, gets into detail about emergencies. But the point is, during a normal episcopal election, all the bishops in the province are involved. This is not complicated. So to continue, we can now look at Antioch 341's Canon 19. This is an ancient canon of the Council of Antioch. It has church-wide acceptance. It says the following: a bishop shall not be ordained without a synod and the presence via legate of the metropolitan of the province. And when he's present, it is by all means better that all his brethren in the ministry of the province should assemble together with him. And so we could see, as we could see, for a bishop to be ordained, all his brethren in the ministry must be present. So very similar presumptions that Antioch has, that the first canon of Nicaea also had. Now, Antioch Canon 4. No bishop shall presume to pass from one province to another and ordain persons to the dignity of the ministry in the church. Not even should he have others with him, unless he should go at the written invitation of the metropolitan and bishops into whose country he goes. But if he should, without invitation, proceed irregularly to the ordination of any, he himself shall suffer the due punishment. So as we can see, one cannot ordain bishops without the permission of the bishops already there. And province here doesn't seem to actually mean patriarchate, because it takes into account that there are bishops already there as in a local synod. This is very similar to Canon 2 of Constantinople 1, where it says the bishops are not to go beyond their... The bishops are not to go beyond their diocese to churches lying outside of their bounds, nor bring confusion on the churches. Let not bishops go beyond their diocese for ordination or any other ecclesiastical administrations unless they be invited. Canon 2, Constantinople 1. So we can see Canon 2, Constantinople 1 sounds almost identical, but it's expanding it, where now patriarchates can't invade other patriarchates. Dioceses can't invade other dioceses. And so, in short, the canons mean no parallel jurisdictions could be set up. You need the permission of the bishops there to do any sort of ecclesiastical work within a local territory. Now, we can see that the idea behind this canon was to prevent schisms, such as the one that formed over Antioch and St. Meletius. It obviously implies the locality elects the bishop. Now, we also see, and this is important, that early canons presume upon synodical consensus. A bishop is not to be allowed to leave his own parish, but by the judgment of many bishops and at their earnest exhortation. So he can't even leave without the permission of everyone. It needs everyone's consent for him to say, I quit. So that is pretty interesting. Another canon, Canon 4 of Canon 4 of Antioch and Canon 34 of the Apostolic Canons. The bishops of every nation must acknowledge him who is first among them and account him as their head, and do nothing of consequence without his consent. But neither let him who is the first do anything without the consent of all, for so there will be unanimity. So we could see again, consensus is the point of this canon. The next one, let him undertake nothing further without the... Let him undertake nothing further without the bishop of the metropolis, neither the latter without the consent of the others. We there have this, Canon 17 of Antioch. If anyone having received the ordination of a bishop and having been appointed to preside over a people shall not accept his ministry and will not be persuaded to proceed to the church entrusted to him, he shall be excommunicated, until a full synod of bishops of the province shall have determined. So as you can see, if a bishop refuses to accept his job as bishop, he's considered excommunicated pending, right? So then the final review is a full synod of all the bishops. So again, this consensus of basic ecclesiology is how everything works within a local synod. And so we have this from Antioch. If any bishop who has been deposed by a synod, presbyter, any bishop who has been deposed by a synod, or any presbyter or deacon who has been deposed by his bishop shall presume to execute any part of the ministry, whether it be a bishop according to his former custom, or a presbyter or a deacon, he shall no longer have any prospect of restoration in another synod. So when a synod deposed someone, it's final. And that's what this canon says. And the canons of Antioch are, by the canon of Trullo, church-wide in force. Now, Antioch Synod in 1628 reiterated Nicaea's canon and applied it specifically to patriarchal elections. Now, one would think you would not need a canon for that, because Canon 1 of Nicaea just says bishop, and a patriarch is a bishop. But this just makes it specific. It is quoted in page 160 of this book, Arab Orthodox Christians. It is a phenomenal book from Holy Trinity Monastery Press or Seminary Press. I absolutely recommend that people get this book. Arab Orthodox, and the canon that is quoted in this book, Arab Orthodox Christians, from 1628 is as follows. It's the first canon. It was the custom of Christians that if the patriarch dies, there should be 2 or 3 bishops to consecrate the patriarch and pray over him in the absence of others. However, it is no longer permitted to become patriarch except in the presence of the bishops of all the dioceses. If anyone violates this conciliar decree, let him. So if anyone violates this conciliar decree, let him be excommunicated. So it's pretty clear that it's no longer permitted, because in times of emergency it was, to only have 2 or 3 bishops elect a patriarch. All the bishops must be present. This is what this canon says, and we're going to see this is very plainly what the Melkite Church violates within recent history of the 1628 canon. It reiterated Nicaea's canon, and like I said before, due to persecution, patriarchal elections were permitted to occur without the whole synod, but this was no longer to be tolerated in 1628. Let's discuss the origin of the Unia in this case. Now, the Levant had small amounts of Latin Rite Roman Catholic. Please weigh in at the comment box. I'd very much appreciate it. But by God's grace, there'll be no more interruptions. Now, the origin of the Unia is that the Levant had small amounts of Latin Rite Roman Catholics, which are Europeans, like Western Europeans, since the Crusades. Now, Maronites, who are often considered this uninterrupted body of Roman Catholic believers since the Crusades, had actually broke communion with Rome after Crusades, it appears. And they were perhaps on and off. I say this because a lot of people just take for granted what the Maronites say about themselves, but the details of history seem to show that they really were not in full Roman Catholic communion until the 16th century. So the quote, Arab Orthodox Christians, page 365, Franciscan missionaries at the turn of the 15th to the 16th century brought upon a final accession of the Maronites to the Church of Rome. Now, I think good evidence that it took to the 16th century for the Maronites to really enter Roman communion is that only in 1580 did the Maronite Synod in Quanobin accept the Filioque, Council of Trent, and Latinizations. Right, so this is more than 100 years after Florence, when the Filioque was decided. This is decades after Trent, and it's only until 1580 that they actually pretty much accepted everything Rome asked of them. So this doesn't seem like a church that was consistently in Roman communion. That doesn't mean they weren't on and off, and there weren't deals made, but I think a lot of people just take for granted the kind of hagiographic gloss that the Maronites say of their own history that's disconnected from the facts of history. And so the Maronites themselves only really became Roman Catholic in the 16th century. It's a rather late development, just like a lot of the Caroline Orthodox in India. Now, in 1553, a disputed line of Nestorian patriarchs in Kurdistan became Roman Catholic. We have a page number there from Arab Orthodox Christians. And this kind of represents to take the canonically irregular faction and ecclesiastical dispute and make them Roman Catholic form a missionary work. This is what the Roman Catholics were doing. They'd find essentially someone who's not legitimate and say, we can make you legitimate, just go and uniate the Pope, and then say, success. This obviously is not a very compelling way of evangelization and doesn't lead to like a good, consistent, strong church body. And so this started changing to the opening of schools and favorable trade deals, something more likely to get people with real allegiance to the Roman Catholic Church. And so that being said, the Greek and Maronite colleges were opened in Rome. A Jesuit mission was opened in Istanbul in 1583 and Aleppo in 1625. Merchants became pro-Roman Catholic because, again, those good trade deals, but only in orientation. They were formerly Eastern Orthodox. They still had an Orthodox bishop. They still went to an Orthodox church. And proof of this is less than 12 people a year were formerly becoming Roman Catholic in the 1600s. That's really almost a meaningless number. And it kind of explains why no one took what was going seriously, because it was just very little people were actually becoming Roman Catholic, even into the 1600s. Now, clergy were educated in Rome or by Roman Catholic schools in the Levant. So they were Eastern Orthodox, even bishops, but they were going to Roman Catholic schools. Dositheus II's nephew, for example, who became a future bishop of Jerusalem, he went to a Roman Catholic school. So this was not rare. This was very common. And charity, quotation marks, not my words, and personal subsidies, meaning payoffs, were given to friendly Roman Catholic aligned people and clergy. And so money was given to pretty much buy goodwill, but they weren't necessarily converting, even though they were receiving this money. And so this represents a predatory but very patient program that the Roman Catholic Church was undergoing, because you're going a century without results. And no one alive in the 21st century has the sort of patience to go for a 1 century long game plan to convert someone else. It's very much a boil the frog slowly sort of approach. Now, eternal decadence within the Orthodox Church is, I think, quite manifest. Even if you don't believe these many patriarchs of Antioch died this way, according to at least the extant records between 1600 to 1725, of 12 patriarchs of Antioch, only 4 were reputed to die naturally. Most were poisoned, not martyred. So these weren't unnatural deaths of glory. This was the death by result of subterfuge. And so this represents a really low nadir within the Antiochian church. Now, during this time, as this Unia is starting to grow, some Syrian Oriental Orthodox in Aleppo became formally Roman Catholic in 1656. Aleppo was a trade city open to Western merchants, so this was not a coincidence. And this occurred under Mar Ignatius Andrew Akijan. Now, Akijan was uncanonically elected by this faction, right? So he wasn't the canonical bishop of Aleppo for the Oriental Orthodox, but he was consecrated by Maronite Patriarch John Baweb of Safra. And from what I could tell, no other bishop. So obviously you can't be an Oriental Orthodox bishop with the consecration of a whole other communion. And the Oriental Patriarch was still alive at this time. So clearly this is a parallel episcopate that was being set up. The Pope accepted him in 1659, a few years later, because a lot of these things were local political machinations. Rome was feeding the fire, but they weren't always going to accept whatever the product was that was the result of the fire they were making. And in 1662, the Oriental Orthodox Synod actually accepted Akijan, and the government accepted Akijan. So he became essentially the official patriarch by everyone's measure. Interestingly enough. But after Akijan's death, the Synod consecrated a Oriental Orthodox Patriarch, Abdul Masih. And so the Roman Catholic faction, the merchants and everything, decided they're going to consecrate a rival Patriarch, Ignatius Gregory Peter VI Shabadin. Now, clearly he's not a legitimate Patriarch, and we're going to see the Melkite Schism is very similar to what this schism was, how blatant it was, just uncanonical. Now, Shabadin dies in 1702, and the Roman Catholic faction lacked a patriarch until 1783. But here's the real interesting part, which again, this is something where if you read into this, it's all out there, but not a lot of people read Oriental Orthodox history. In 1783, Ignatius Michael III Jarwe was elected by 5 of the 7 Oriental Orthodox bishops, and he was in communion with the Roman Catholic Church. He was a Uniate patriarch. And so Oriental Orthodoxy now has this canonical problem that their synod actually was majority Uniate. And they couldn't, as a synod with consensus, elect a Oriental Orthodox bishop because the majority went Roman Catholic. So what we had was the Oriental Orthodox went into schism and joined the Roman Catholic Church. And essentially, many ended up joining back, but then they would have left the body they joined. And so you have this schism of a schism, went to schism, and then went out of that third schism. And so this shows that the Antiochian or the Syriac Orthodox communion of today actually has non-canonical origins up into the late 1700s. And this is something where I welcome people that do this full time with the Oriental Orthodox, like Subdeacon Daniel Kakish or David Urhan, to get into this more detail, because this is rather neglected, but it's a rather glaring problem for the Oriental Orthodox. At so late a stage, they had a Roman Catholic patriarch elected by the majority of their synod. And so what was left of their synod is actually the minority and would have been not canonical for them to elect a patriarch. So it's pretty crazy when seen to it in that light. Now, all the Unia follows these similar shenanigans in these non-canonical origin stories. The Coptic Catholics were a creation in Rome, like a purely paper creation, where then they just pick a priest and they make him a bishop in Rome sort of deal. We have greetings from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Greetings to Abe. And was not the result of local politicking and local synodical disputes, but the Armenian Catholic Church was a combination of a local synodical dispute, Rome appointing bishops from afar, and Jacob Petros II Haseptian ordaining one bishop and two priests, making him patriarch in 1740. So he ordained his own bishop, and that one bishop with two priests called him a patriarch. Clearly, no canons would accept this, but that's how this church exists, because the whole Unia program exists as a result of all these illegitimate machinations. It's not like these are legitimate synods that just somehow switched back to Roman Catholicism. This is all, like you see Wikipedia there, this is just all there out in the open. Now, there's similar origin to other unions, like I was talking about, that were made due to the fact that they're not legitimate, retroactively legitimate via Roman union. And so we will now get more focus in the context preceding the Melkite Schism. Now, Macarius III of Antioch is often called the first secret Roman Catholic patriarch, and that's because though formerly Eastern Orthodox, he secretly signed the Roman Catholic confession for the money and the influence it provided. And this comes up even in the baptism book that Uncanonical Press did, and Metropolitan Callisto Ware talks about it, and sort of like he was really Roman Catholic. But the view of Panchenko in the book Arab Orthodox Christians is that this was just flim-flam. He's doing it for the money, and his heart wasn't in it at all, and that's why no one really seriously considered him a Roman Catholic. It was just a weird form of politicking that made sense at the time. And what's the evidence for this? He did nothing publicly Roman Catholic. None of his sons were educated in Roman Catholic institutions, and that was very rare. And so that kind of implies that he actually was dogmatically opposed to the Roman Catholic Church, that he wouldn't even have his sons doing that, because Dositheus II, who was rabidly anti-Roman Catholic, had his own nephew educated in a Roman Catholic school. So this was very rare and sticks out in the analysis of Panchenko, that there's no doubt, he says, that Macarius remained in the bosom of the Orthodox tradition. Now, between 1686 and 1694, Athanasius III and Cyril III contested the Patriarchate of Antioch. So what we have here is a disputed election. Now, Athanasius, like Macarius before him, was a secret Catholic. But Athanasius conceded the Patriarchate to Cyril III, thus ending the dispute, in exchange for being Bishop of Aleppo, money, and a promise to succeed the Patriarchate. Athanasius went on a begging tour afterwards throughout Europe and Moravia, essentially, and he actually even became Archbishop of Cyprus in 1709. So it's essentially really kind of ruthless careerism in the church, but wasn't rare in those days, regrettably. Now, the Ottomans lose a war to the Western coalition, which is the Europeans, in 1699, and trade and political concessions are made to Roman Catholics as a result. And this is what creates a real shot in the arm for all these Roman Catholic-leaning, formerly Orthodox people to start becoming more actively Roman Catholic. And so Euthemius al-Saifi, a secret Catholic bishop, who's formerly Eastern Orthodox, but was paid by Rome and involved in the silk trade, he would become a formerly Roman Catholic bishop in 1701 for a small Roman Catholic population. Now, this is very bizarre because he stayed within the Eastern Orthodox Synod for like another 17 years, we're going to find. But this is something that was occurring. The real beginner of the Melkite Church is Eutymius. And we need to see what is motivating these people to become Melkite, because it's not a very romantic sort of story, because these were not romantic times. People being secret Catholics for the money, people becoming Roman Catholic leaning for trade rights and connections to the French merchants. You could say, well, these are just accusations. Well, here is a synopsis of a letter of his. And this is by Haddad and Conversion of the Eastern Orthodox Christian to the Unia and Conversion and Continuity from the Pontifical Institute. So I'm quoting a Roman Catholic source. And it says as follows. In a remarkable letter written to Rome by Eutymius, the chief architect of the Melkite Uniate community, the rigors of fasting are cited as one of the principal reasons for the conversion of the Melkites. In this context, it means Arab Christians, to Islam. At least before Eutymius and others of his Latinizing persuasion relegated the relevant canons to oblivion. So, very plainly, people wanted to be Roman Catholic, and they would even stop being Christians altogether because they wanted to eat dairy, drink wine, have oil their food, and eat fish during fast. And this actually surprised me. Like, people couldn't be that shallow. But this actually came up again and again when you're reading Arab Orthodox Christians. This was something very important to these people, but I wouldn't dare make the accusation until I found this in a Roman Catholic source. And it's just, these obviously were not very convinced Orthodox Christians that they would apostatize for the dinner menu. And that's just the sad truth. Fasting in Islam is pretty easy. You can eat whatever you want once it gets dark out. It's not that difficult when you compare to what Orthodox fasting demands. We have this from a High Church Anglican. Good luck and everything. Thank you, Brother Brosef. And so what we see is the Melkite movement is the result of people that really just are not that religious. Religion was a part of life, but their sympathies and their allegiance was to convenience and to career and not to high-minded ideals about the Pope. And that's just a reality. And so that being said, by 1700, approximately 5 bishops were secret Catholics. And what we're going to find, these secret Catholics, of course, become the core of who eventually become the Melkite Synod. Now, Antioch had approximately 24 metropolitans during this time. And this is important because it gives us real numbers to deal with. That, right, these secret Catholics and what became the Melkites was a minority movement. Now, Eutymius al-Safi invaded the Jerusalem Patriarchate in Acre. And so the funny thing is, that's what really, I think, did him in, not becoming Roman Catholic and having Roman Catholics come to him and be a bishop for them, but invading a bishop, an Acre, under a patriarchate that had influence in Constantinople or Istanbul, right? That was the real issue here. And so this led to anti-Roman Catholic persecutions. So, right, again, these dirty politics pay off the local pasha or whomever to persecute the people that are against you. And so the Orthodox side paid the Muslims to persecute the Roman Catholics. And this ultimately resulted in Eutymius' deposition in 1718 and the Antiochian Synod deposing him in 1722. Now, Cyril III of Antioch had secret dialogue with the Pope in 1716. But by 1718 to 19, after like essentially having this bromance with the Pope and saying he's, I'm in allegiance to you and I agree with your doctrines and all this stuff, after not receiving, in quote, expected benefits, meaning money, he pivoted back to Orthodoxy. Now, this was not rare because even Eutymius was forced to formally and publicly repent of Roman Catholicism in November 1719. Excuse me. So Cyril III dies, and so now it's time to elect a new patriarch. And sadly, the choices are not that good. Let me just put on mute. Who are the people running for election? It seems like the terrible choices we have in America today. The repentant Euthemius, who was literally a Roman Catholic bishop for almost 2 decades, who now is a born-again Orthodox bishop, wants to be patriarch, and the carpetbagger Athanasius III, who was going all over Europe and also a secret Catholic, wants to be patriarch, and they're contesting the patriarchal throne. Now, the synod chose Athanasius, so he becomes the legitimate patriarch of Antioch, and he operated in Aleppo. And at this point, he became a convinced Orthodox Christian, again, for the reasons of he's the head of a synod that's majority not secret Catholic, right? So he now avoided contact with the Vatican after his elevation to the patriarchal throne, and he publicly condemned Roman Catholic dogmas. So the carpetbagger turns out not to be a terrible patriarch. Now, Euthemius died in 1723 and was succeeded in Acre by his nephew, Cyril Tanas. And Cyril Tanas becomes really the chief figure in this Melkite history. Now, Patriarch Athanasius III in 1724 dies, and Cyril Tanas and his former Cypriot deacon Sylvester vied for the patriarchy. All right, so our choices are the carpetbagger's deacon and Cyril Tanas, who enters as bishop as an invaded jurisdiction and related to Euthemius, who was a terrible bishop for the reasons we already covered. Now, the Aleppans, despite their overt Roman Catholic sympathies, petitioned for Sylvester, right? Not Cyril Tanas. And this was due to Athanasius the carpetbagger's legacy. They wanted someone that was like Athanasius. He worked out very well for them. Athanasius ruled out of Aleppo, and so his former deacon was the one they petitioned for. Now, Cyril then usurped the title of patriarch, and this is where the schism begins. Cyril Tanas has a patently uncanonical consecration, and this shows you that the origin of the Melkite Church is non-canonical. When the Holy Synod of Antioch refused to elect him canonically, Latin missionaries in Damascus arranged for bishops created through single-handed consecrations in Euthemius al-Safi's line to perform the necessary episcopal consecration. So one account is that he was made the bishop of Antioch through people that had single-handed ordinations, which itself violates the canons, particularly when the apostolic canons. Now, the other story, you go, well, I don't believe that story. Well, there's only one other story, and you have to choose which one's more likely. The former is considered more likely, but here's the other story. The other story is the consecration was done by an Armenian and Maronite bishops. So somehow less bad because it's more than bishops with single-handed consecrations, I suppose. But it's just then this cannot be possible because he would have been ordained by Roman Catholics. How do you become the patriarch of Eastern Orthodox Synod with a consecration from Roman Catholic bishops, right? It just doesn't work. So whichever origin story you choose to believe, both are uncanonical. They're just not possible. So, and guys, keep the audience questions going. I will address these in the end. Now, as a reminder about this uncanonical consecration, Antioch had 24 metropolitans during this time. According to the canons, you would have needed all of the synod to accept their patriarch. You need consensus. Now, the Melkites had 5 bishops at most supporting Cyril Tanas, and these bishops created a new see, a parallel hierarchy in Furzel, to add a 6th bishop. So they clearly, right, it's not my opinion, they clearly lacked the consensus to elect the patriarch, which was necessary according to the 1628 canon. All right, so Cyril Tanas initially did not seek Roman Catholic communion because he was hoping that eventually the synod would come around and accept him, and that would have actually legitimized him, though perhaps they might have had to reconsecrate him in all honesty. But he initially did not seek Roman communion for that reason. Now, in the same year, Sylvester was elected in Constantinople and was received by the Antiochian Synod in 1725. So we have now this disputed election where the vast majority, dare I say consensus, because it's 19 of the bishops, accept the Sylvester as patriarch. And this is not the first time something like this occurs. People can make a lot out, well, he started in Constantinople, so that invalidates him, but that's historically not true for the Antiochian Synod. Now, similar to Theophanes and George of Antioch, these were patriarchs during the councils of Constantinople III and Trullo. They were titular patriarchs in Constantinople who were then accepted by the synods in absentia. And so that was something that made them legitimate. Jerusalem and Alexandria's patriarchs were probably the same according to. So as I said, Jerusalem and Alexandria's patriarchs were no different in this regard. They were accepted by their synods, and the citations are there on screen. So the Melkites had 6 bishops at most, and the synod had 18 or 19 others who received Sylvester. Now, Aleppo was the pro-Roman Catholic epicenter and tired of Sylvester's anti-Latin reforms. Now, Sylvester kind of went in and he really mishandled himself, probably because he cared too much to do the right thing. So he actually expected the people to follow the fast and not eat fish and stuff like that. You'd call them fishmongers and stuff. And apparently, because as we already established, the main reason for apostasy to Islam was the dinner menu. This led to not appealing to Rome, but appealing for Aleppo to be placed under Constantinople's jurisdiction in 1728. So they were so mad with Sylvester, even though they were Roman Catholic leaning, they were still Eastern Orthodox at heart. So that's why they appealed to Constantinople. Now, in the meantime, Aleppo decides they're just going to elect another bishop, who's Michael. And so this creates another parallel hierarchy, okay? And so Michael Aleppo probably was in communion with Cyril Tanas at this time. This establishes a parallel church body. Cyril nominally over Damascus, Michael over Aleppo. We had the bishop in that third city we talked about. And we had Sylvester in the Eastern Orthodox Synod over Antioch and Damascus. And Germanus was over Aleppo. They kept him in, exile for, I think, 2 or 3 decades because he was not, he was still alive. It's not like they replaced a dead bishop of Aleppo. Now, through bribery, again, which is not extraordinary during this time, Michael received the legal right from the Muslims to be bishops, and this was done through cash offerings. Now, Tanas lacked papal communion, and he was excommunicated by the 1724 Synod, which was signed on by Constantinople and Jerusalem and implicitly accepted by Alexandria because they recognized Sylvester. So for this reason, Tanas really had no more leg to stand on. The Antiochian Synod was not going to legitimize him. And so he started normalizing his relations with the Roman Catholic Church. And the Melkites only became Roman Catholic by really 1744. Right? And that's because, again, those non-canonical origins weren't something that the Roman Catholics could accept right away. And they already had fairly positive relations with the real Eastern Orthodox Synod. So you might not want to throw a rock at the hornet's nest when you might be able to do better work with the Synod that's already there. But over time, they gave up on this and they decided with the Melkites. And I actually blame Sylvester because Sylvester just alienated so many people to the point where it made it look like that the Melkites could have took over. Now, that being said, looks could be deceiving. The Melkites remained a small minority into the mid-18th century with only 6 episcopates. So again, they were never the whole synod, and the others supported Sylvester, and by joining the Roman Catholic Church, they gave the full synod to Sylvester, and then Sylvester becomes the uncontested canonical patriarch of Antioch as a result. Now, in 1745, Cyril Tanas then established parallel bishopric in Beirut. So he could see in Beirut, he now continues his non-canonical program of parallel episcopates, but that doesn't mean he was unpopular, because half the laity in Damascus itself aligned themselves with Cyril Tanas. Even if he didn't control the synod, he was getting popular. And now we have this claim during the stream that the historical revisionism in this live stream is remarkable. And no, this is almost tortuously, which is why the page number is on board, the result of peer-reviewed research published in this volume, Arab Orthodox Christians, by Holy Trinity Monastery, Seminary Press. So this is mainstream history, even if it hurts some feelings, which I apologize for. And this is a problem in apologetics, because when truth is inconvenient, people just say it's revisionism, it's a lie, it's a this and that, but they don't actually read this source. Because during the stream, we read a Roman Catholic book. I quoted another historical article, and I'm quoting another book. Like, these are not just random things I'm pulling out. So regrettably, this is not revisionism, though people just allege it, and they're just hoping that no one actually looks into this. But I expect better from my audience. So that being said, why are the Melkites uncanonical? Let's do a quick review if it's not already clear. They originate with single-handed ordinations and without universal synodical acceptance, right? We established in the canons that's necessary. And there's no doubt, with only 5 or 6 bishops, they fail to meet this criteria. And by the only 2 extant stories that exist of the origin of their body, that either originated with an Arminian and Maronite bishop, which again, then they couldn't be the legitimate Antiochian synod, because those are foreign synods. And for that to occur, they need to be invited by the synod that's already there. We already read those canons. Or with people with single-handed ordinations, which are not canonical. So both stories don't bode well for the origin of the Melkite Church. They certainly created parallel and new episcopates, as we already established during this. And when the Melkites left Eastern Orthodox Communion entirely in 1730, they bestowed upon Sylvester universal synodical acceptance, which, as we established in 1688 Antiochian Canon, is what was necessary. And so the undisputed canonical patriarch is Sylvester, not Cyril Tanas. Now, that being said, it's so easy to point the fingers of how bad those Melkites are, when, as I'm saying, both sides were bad. This schism occurred because of sin and people not taking their faith seriously. That's why, again, because the dinner menu, they were becoming Muslim, these people. These were not very convinced Christians that love Jesus, that you would apostatize over the dinner menu. And again, that's not me. That was Euthemius, again, the originator of the Melkite group, saying this. And I got that from a Roman Catholic book. So not revisionism. So that being said, the Antiochian synod clearly was not cleaning house, right? They had all these secret Catholics. Of course, people know about it. They were implicitly tolerating Euthemius and his ordinations for a very long time. It's not like they couldn't be aware in the dark about this, I have to think. And so this schism was a long time coming because of this lack of taking serious the sin in the church. And we are in the modern day in a very similar state, right? The ecumenical patriarchate allows for bishops to remarry after divorce, which actually defies Crete 2016. So this defies the mind, how they defied their own synods. And so there's the Alexandrian patriarch with the female deacon in Madagascar or whatever it is. The pretty much wholesale allowance for people to violate the Trullan canon and to have an Orthodox sacramental marriage, marrying outside the Eastern Orthodox faith. We have major issues tolerated today, which will lead to the problems that we've seen that happened at the Antiochian Synod, because the toleration of heterodoxy will be punished by God. It's just what occurs, and usually schisms and persecutions. Lord have mercy on us, but that is a reality. And this is why, in my humble opinion, within even the true Orthodox bodies, because they're schismatics, they have their own schisms of schisms of schisms. When we violate the canons and violate sacred tradition, the grace of God leaves us. We're left to our own devices, and we have these ecclesiastical problems. Sin creates schism. Now, back to the Antiochian Synod during this time, they were playing an obvious double game, right? They were playing Rome and the Turks against each other. So I think, like with Macarius, I think probably convincingly so, he, though a secret Catholic, wasn't a convinced secret Catholic, but he was playing a double game. They wanted political influence to insulate themselves, to get money, to maybe pay off the people they needed to prevent themselves getting killed, all the things that happened in those days. So it's an obvious double game. Almost everyone was involved or knew some of those involved. And orthodoxy and authenticity and fidelity to the faith was an afterthought during this era. And that is regrettable and terrible. Now, both sides violently persecuted each other. From, if you want, who started the violent persecutions, at least in the book, from what I could tell, it's the Eastern Orthodox side against Euthemius. But the end of the day, it's like both sides ended up doing it. And Euthemius was at least within the Eastern Orthodox Synod, so it becomes kind of strange. These persecutions were probably seen as a fight between Jerusalem and Antioch originally, but there's no justifying hurting and killing people over this sort of stuff. And so clearly Christianity and the love of Christ is an afterthought, that both sides are militantly persecuting each other. Both sides violently persecuted each other. Now, how do we undo this schism? All right. Here's what's necessary, in my humble opinion. We need an internal moral reformation. It begins with each one of us, right? We have to live as faithful Christians. All right. And then we have to influence the people immediately around us to live as faithful Orthodox Christians. And we have to slowly influence the seminaries and the bishops and encourage them, because the laity are the guardians of the faith, to teach correct Orthodox Christianity and to be faithful Orthodox Christians. And we have to give alms and do the things and fast and do all the things that Christians ought to do. And so what's needed first is an internal moral reformation, because how did the schism start? The opposite, moral deformation, right? Not fasting. This is how the schism started. So it seems silly, but how do we fix the schism? How do we make one what Christ wanted one? With an eternal moral reformation. Now, the second thing, which is, of course, in apologetics that people care more about, regrettably, though I would actually, it's less important than the moral reformation even, is to identify the proper canonical ecclesiology. I think anyone who is reasonable, clearly the Melkites are canonically irregular, all right? Because they're just in a violation of the canons, and we've established this. This is indisputable. And so if we could identify, well, clear this violation of the canons, at least we know, well, how do we fix this? We follow the canons. And that's what prevents the problem. Now, I feel a step beyond this, and this is what the late Pope Francis recognized, is that the Unia was a predatory project. Okay, it was a predatory project. As we could see here, it was this long game to slowly buy influence and take the canonically irregular people, and essentially, and there was a winning of a war and whatnot. And that being said, to slowly chip away the numbers and make people Roman Catholic. It was a predatory project, right? And all right, they want to fast less, we'll let them fast less. They want single-handed ordination, ordained bishop, sure, we'll settle for that. The person who's the illegitimate patriarch, will take him in, right? And so it was predatory. It was looking for moments of opportunity to score. And this is something that is criminal, and it's regrettable, and we have to recognize it for what it is, and because that's how we undo these things. And lastly, if by God's grace we were to get lucky enough to reach this point, we would need reordinations, because I think vesting is inappropriate, because what they lack in the Melkites is even the form of a proper ordination. So like with the Uniates in Ukraine, from what I could tell, it didn't start with single-handed ordinations. And so you could vest these bishops because at least they had the form of a proper ordination, and then reception of the church then fills that with the Spirit. That's at least like what St. Philaret of New York and other and Russian tradition, for what it's worth, approaches this topic. But with the Melkites, saith me, not the Lord, and not the canonist, I don't think this is possible, because they didn't even have the form of proper ordinations, right? So they didn't even have non-canonical ordinations. They had improper form of those ordinations because they had single-handed ordinations. And so that is a real issue and would need to be corrected. And so before we do audience questions and comments, I just want to remind people, if this show has blessed you, you've learned something you've not learned elsewhere, you got now access to resources and books you weren't aware of, please bless the show and make this possible by going to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate and donate to Church Cambodia. Venmo, I prefer PayPal, but also Patreon if you want to be a monthly donor, all below. And it makes such a big difference. We've received, even into this week, and I haven't done a show for 2 or 3 weeks now, such generous donations. We're very grateful for your donations. And we've been translating the Lives of the Saints for the first time ever. For $10, you make possible a translation of the Saint of the Day that's never been translated before in the Khmer, that's the Cambodian language. So for $10, you make that possible. Also, as we can see here, the pictures on screen, and I'll make them bigger. That about 6-7 years ago, because of eminent domain in Sihanoukville, the Russians there built probably a $250,000 church, which, if you look at it, rather cheap considering. And it was a real blessing to those Russian donors. But that beautiful fence that keeps out people from trying to break in was destroyed many years ago. When I visited Sihanoukville 3 years ago, it wasn't there. And you see it looks all messy in the middle, but now there's plants and, it looks normal. But the problem is we don't have a full-time priest there. And so this leads to break-ins. So we actually have a parishioner living there to try to dissuade the break-ins. But, she doesn't have guns and stuff. This is Cambodia. That stuff's illegal. And so what really deters a lot of break-ins is, again, that fence. And we still have that beautiful gate. So we don't have to buy a new gate. We just have to put everything back together. We're looking to raise $4,500 of donations. And those donations are so important because you help preserve and protect that church, which we already invested about $250,000 in. Probably more, honestly, but I'll just say $250,000 because I know the Phnom Penh church is about $400,000. And so for $4,500, you prevent break-ins and the sort of problems that do occur in third world countries. And that being said, 45 donors, $100 each, builds this. We'll be raising money for this throughout the year. So please seriously pray and reflect upon helping preserve the church in Sihanoukville by being part of this project. Even if it's a $5 donation, it is much appreciated. But also, wherever your heart is led, the translation of Saint Lives into Cambodian, $10 a saint, just let me know where you want the money to go. Otherwise, we'll disperse it pretty much equally and according to the church's expenses. Your donations make this show possible. Your donations make the missionary work in Cambodia possible. And I'm very grateful for all of your support. Now, let's do some audience questions. And we had this one. Can you specify the historical revisionism from Curtis? And it was just a drive-by comment because there isn't historical revisionism, but this is becoming a real problem, is that people don't critically interact with their religion. The amount of ChatGPT and Grok questions with fake citations and from church fathers and stuff is that people aren't using their own thought. And this is really bad. These are the things that God, your salvation's on the line. Don't use AI to do the research for you or to get the right answer what I should believe. That's insane. You should start with an eternal reformation, like I said, fasting, prayer, reading the scriptures, reading the Saint Lives. And then if you want to do serious research, you might start here and then look into books. And dare I say, ask the Roman Catholic apologists. Enough of them are Uniats. What you're going to not find is them quoting books that prove their points. They'll give you one-liners, but are they going to carefully make a case like I did today with published books from Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox sources? And they're not going to, because the reality is the Melkite question is very simple. They're just very, very nakedly, canonically in the wrong. And so there's no historical revisionism here. We have the claim made that the Antiochian priests venerate Maronite saints. And just be aware, the Maronites have saints pre the Melkite Schism. I call them proto-Maronites. And so we have to be very specific about this. And again, who's venerated, it's not who some random priest has an icon of. It's what the synod has in their synaxarium. And so that's something that we don't have in this case. We have how many sacraments are in the church? Is the 7 sacraments teaching correct? I'd say essentially so. But in reality, a funeral is a sacrament. Monasticism is a sacrament. And I think both are actually, both are mentioned even in St. Dionysius. So this is not like some later development. It exists in the 1st century. And so, but 7's a good roundabout number that we could agree upon. We could say monasticism is another sort of marriage. I don't know where you put a funeral, though, honestly. That's why I'll accept the number 7, but in reality, it's more. We have more than that. And so that being said, we have fasted 40 days as an Anglican. No meat, booze for Lent. That's no sweets. That's more strict than most Orthodox. They'll have sweets because we can't eat anything else. Compline every night, Triduum services. I will say, like, unless it's a fish, wine, oil day during Lent, I won't eat. I didn't eat sweets this time either. But sometimes, it's hard. And, and during a sweeter fast, like the Advent fast, you might, I'm going to be a little more lenient as long as it follows the rules. And again, it's where your heart is, right? God doesn't need you to fast, which is why I purposely loosen the fast in a fish, wine, oil day. So I get more out of the day and reflect upon the Annunciation or reflect upon Palm Sunday or something like that. And so interesting comment there. We have, let's see, bro, can I get an English liturgy of your church? You could just Google Liturgy St. John Chrysostom. It is free. You'll find them all over the place. We have, will you ever do a stream on the pretty much the Caroline Christians? I heard there was a chance they could become Orthodox had it not been for Carlo Caris errors. I've not heard that Carlo Caris had any real say in that. There was a time because they didn't want to be controlled by the Portuguese that they could have went that way, but I really just don't know enough about it, and I haven't run into it in the English language. But they were Nestorians, right? They weren't really Syriac Orthodox. That's just where they went, and so they could have become Eastern Orthodox. And sadly, even to this day, we're not outward thinking enough, and we need to be. We need to bring these people into the church. And guys, we're out of time for questions, so we'll have this. Christ is risen, of deity's risen. Will God save people who have died outside the Orthodox Church in heretical or pagan beliefs? And normatively, no. All right, of course not. He only saves Christians. He only saves those within the Orthodox Church. But we do not judge individuals. We don't know who's going to get prayed out of hell, etc. We don't get into that stuff. We don't know. But the answer, of course, no. If you're faithless, you will not be saved. And so without any other questions, I'm going to call it a night. Please like, share, if this stream has blessed you, and subscribe to the channel. And as well as that, consider donating to the mission in Cambodia, because that is something that's really a blessing to me to see your guys' support. It really gives myself and my wife an oomph to continue the work we're doing there. And I will call it a day, and I will end the show as an all of them by quoting Jesus Rock, fight to death for the truth, and the Lord God will fight for you. God bless you. Have a great day.